The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale air conditioning. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in thin shafts of light that cut across the long polished table. I sat at the far end, my posture straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My pulse, however, betrayed me, pounding, insistent, like a drum beating beneath my ribs. Mark Benson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest as if he had just delivered some universal truth. His words still rang in the room, sharp and cutting. "Passengers want to feel safe when they see who's in charge," he said with that smug smirk of his. "And a woman in that role, well, it's not exactly comforting, is it?" Laughter, not loud, but enough, rippled through the room. A few of the men exchanged glances, some amused, others simply indifferent. My chest burned, but I forced my hands to stay still. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I had flown through thunderstorms, handled engine malfunctions midair, calmed passengers in the middle of panic attacks at 35,000 feet. But nothing in the sky had ever hit me like his words. "My name is Maya Sterling. I've been a pilot for 25 years. I'm 43, divorced, and every fiber of my life has revolved around the sky since I was a teenager. Flying has always been my freedom, my escape. But in aviation, freedom only gets you so far. No matter how flawless your record, no matter how many hours you've logged, people like Mark Benson still look at you and see a liability." That day, when the promotion I had poured my heart into went to someone who had barely earned his wings, I knew something had to change. A spark at 9. The first time I sat in a cockpit, I was 9 years old. My father, a mechanic at the local airfield, had brought me along on a Saturday. He was the kind of man who always smelled faintly of oil and coffee, with grease under his fingernails no matter how much he scrubbed. "Maya, you've got to see this," he said, his voice alive with excitement as he led me across the tarmac. He stopped beside a Cessna 172, its white paint gleaming under the afternoon sun. He opened the door with a flourish. "Go on. Climb in." I hesitated only a second before clambering up onto the seat. The leather was worn smooth, the metal cool under my small hands. My fingers brushed across the controls, trembling as though I was touching something sacred. "Think you could fly one of these someday?" Dad asked, leaning against the frame, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. I straightened my shoulders. "Are you kidding? I could fly it right now." He laughed, a booming sound that seemed to echo across the hangars. He ruffled my hair. "Big dreams, Maya. Don't let anyone tell you they're too big." Those words lodged themselves in me like a compass needle pointing north. The divide at home. Not everyone in my family shared his conviction. My mother believed in safer dreams. Practical ones. She was a schoolteacher who valued security above all. "You'll break your heart chasing things like this," she told me one evening as I sat at the kitchen table, sketching little planes in the margins of my homework. "Flying isn't a life for a girl. You should think about teaching. Or medicine. Something steady." But my father shook his head, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Let her dream, Helen," he said. "She'll prove herself." My mother sighed, but didn't argue. She never tried to stop me outright, but the weight of her doubt was always there, like a cloud hovering at the edges of my horizon. Lessons in grit. By 16, I had made up my mind. I wanted lessons. My friends were saving for cars, clothes, college trips. I was saving for flight hours. Babysitting, cashier shifts, mowing lawns, I squirreled away every penny. The day I told Dad I had enough for my first official lesson, he set down his coffee mug and looked at me with the kind of seriousness he usually reserved for bad weather forecasts. "So, you're really going to do this?" he asked. "Absolutely." My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "It won't be easy, Maya." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those steady brown eyes. "They'll make you work twice as hard because you're a girl. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," I said without hesitation. For a long moment he just looked at me. Then the corner of his mouth lifted. "Then let's get you in the sky." The Air Force years. Fast forward a decade. My hair was tucked into a regulation bun. My boots shined to perfection. I had traded high school notebooks for flight manuals and my weekends for grueling training schedules. The Air Force had been my ticket to real hours, real experience. But it was also my first real taste of the battles I would face for the rest of my career. "You're up, Sterling," my commanding officer barked one morning during drills. "Prove to me you belong here." The assignment was always the same. The toughest missions, the worst conditions, the highest stakes. My male counterparts got easier runs, smoother evaluations. I got storms, malfunctions, impossible time limits. I never complained. I executed each task with precision. My reports were flawless. My results, undeniable. And yet, when promotion lists came out, my name was always missing. Instead, I heard whispers in the mess hall. "She's good, but she's not leadership material." Or worse, "She's just trying to prove she's as tough as the guys." I swallowed the bitterness and flew anyway. Commercial skies. After the Air Force, I transitioned to commercial aviation. I thought civilian skies might be kinder. I was wrong. The sexism wasn't as overt, but it was there in the quiet comments, the raised eyebrows from passengers, the subtle smirks from colleagues. "Didn't expect a woman up front," one businessman muttered as he stepped into the plane. "You don't look like a pilot," a passenger once said, as if it were a compliment. I told myself every safe landing, every smooth takeoff was proof. Every flight was a chance to show them wrong. And for a while, that was enough. The final blow. When the position for chief pilot opened, I thought it was finally my time. 20,000 hours in the air. A spotless record. Years of service. I was ready. But in that conference room, with Mark Benson's words hanging heavy in the air, I knew better. "Passengers want to feel safe," he had said. "And a woman in charge. That's a tough sell." It wasn't just a comment. It was a verdict. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "They'll make you work twice as hard." I had worked 10 times as hard, and it still wasn't enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my logbook. 25 years, thousands of flights, countless hours logged, and what did I have to show for it? A ceiling I couldn't break through. I picked up the phone and called Dad. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" His voice was calm, steady, the same anchor it had always been. "I'm done, Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't keep doing this. I've given them everything, and they just keep tossing me aside." There was silence on the other end. Then he spoke. "Maybe it's about time." "About time for what?" "About time you stop playing their game," he said. "Maybe it's time you make your own rules." His words sank into me like seeds. I didn't know it then, but they were already starting to grow. The night after that phone call with my father, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the logbook spread open before me, the neat columns of hours, flight numbers, routes, conditions. 25 years of my life, laid out in ink. Each line a story of its own. Storms weathered, passengers calmed, engines coaxed into cooperation. Yet no line on that page had ever been enough to convince men like Mark Benson. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe it was time to stop playing their game. But if I wasn't a commercial airline pilot, then who was I? The question haunted me for days. The seed of an idea. I was in the grocery store, pushing a cart half-heartedly down the aisle, when the idea came to me. I passed a little girl tugging on her mother's sleeve, pointing at a toy airplane on the shelf. "Mama, I want to fly one," she said, her eyes shining. Her mother smiled, indulging her. "You'll have to be a flight attendant first, sweetie." The words hit me like turbulence. The mother hadn't meant anything cruel, but she had planted a boundary in her daughter's mind without even realizing it. A line. "Here's how far you can dream." And suddenly it was clear. If the industry wouldn't make room for women in leadership, then I would build a place where women belonged. A school, not just to teach women how to fly, but how to lead. That night, I called Rachel Kim. Rachel. Rachel had been my flight instructor years ago. Tough as nails, sharp as a hawk, and one of the few people who had always seen me as a pilot, not a novelty. She had since gone into private aviation but kept one foot in the teaching world. When I told her my idea, she didn't hesitate. "Maya, this is brilliant," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement. The industry needs this. Count me in. Her certainty bolstered mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the sky wasn't closing in but opening up. Pushback. Of course, not everyone shared Rachel's enthusiasm. My mother called me the next day after I told her what I was planning. A school? She asked, her voice tight with concern. Maya, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Planes, instructors, permits. This isn't like starting a book club. I know, Mom, but I can't keep banging my head against a wall that won't break. If I don't do this, who will? She sighed, a sound full of love and worry. You've always been stubborn. Just promise me you'll have a backup plan. I promise, I said, but I knew I didn't have one. This was it. The rejections. Rachel and I spent weeks at my kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, business plans, cost estimates, lists of potential locations. We drafted proposals, practiced pitches, and approached every bank and investor we could find. The responses were variations of the same polite rejection. A women-only flight school? One banker said, raising an eyebrow. That's a niche market. I'm not sure there's enough demand to make it sustainable. Another leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. You'd be limiting yourself. Why not open it to everyone? More practical. Each no felt like sandbags tied to my ankles. For a moment, I wondered if my mother was right. Wings of change. Then one evening, Rachel showed up at my apartment holding her laptop. Have you heard of Wings of Change? She asked, dropping onto the couch. I shook my head. They're a nonprofit that funds aviation initiatives, especially ones that focus on diversity. Her eyes gleamed. Maya, this is it. We spent the next 3 nights putting together a proposal more detailed than anything we'd written before. We outlined our mission, not just to teach women to fly, but to equip them with the confidence and resilience to thrive in an industry that often tried to shut them out. We included everything: budget projections, scholarship plans, mentorship programs, even a section on community outreach. By the time we hit submit, my eyes were red from lack of sleep, but my heart was steady. A week later, the phone rang. Maya Sterling, a calm, professional voice asked. Yes, this is she. This is Dr. Emily Grant, Director of Wings of Change. I've read your proposal. I have to say, it's exactly the kind of project we want to support. We're prepared to offer you a startup grant to cover your first year. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. You're serious? Dead serious. Your vision is exactly what this industry needs. I nearly dropped the phone. The hangar. With their support, everything began to move. Rachel and I leased a small hangar at a regional airfield. The place was dusty, the paint peeling, the concrete floor cracked, but to me, it looked like possibility. We bought 2 used training planes, Cessna 172s, just like the one I'd first sat in at 9 years old. We ordered chairs and whiteboards for the classroom space, patched leaks, painted walls. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. We called it the Women's Aviation Academy. First students. Opening day, I woke up before dawn, nerves buzzing through my body. I got to the hangar early, rearranging the chairs for the 5th time, my palms slick with sweat. Would anyone even show up? The first car pulled in just as I was doubting everything. A young woman stepped out, her hands stained with grease, her eyes sharp with determination. Hi, she said, extending a hand. I'm Amira. I'm an aircraft mechanic, but I've always wanted to be a pilot. Every time I mentioned it, people laughed. Said I should stick to fixing planes, not flying them. Then I heard about this program. Her grip was firm, her smile shy but hopeful. Moments later, another arrived. A woman in her mid-50s, her hair silver at the temples, her eyes full of awe and apprehension. My name's Helen, she said softly. Flying's been my dream since I was a girl. But life got in the way, family, work, everything. When I saw your school, I thought, maybe it's not too late. By mid-morning, 5 women sat in the hangar, each with her own story, her own reason for being there. But all of them shared the same determination. I stood at the front, my throat tight. I had faced conference rooms full of executives without flinching, but standing before these 5 women felt different. "You don't just belong here," I told them. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You are the reason this place exists." Their faces lit up, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The hangar smelled of fresh paint and engine oil, a scent that had become strangely comforting. Every morning I arrived before sunrise, unlocking the metal doors as the first light spilled across the tarmac. And every morning, without fail, the sound of laughter, nervous chatter, and the eager hum of my students soon followed. It had been 3 months since our launch. 3 months of long days, late nights, and endless balancing acts between teaching, fundraising, and keeping our old Cessnas airworthy. But despite the exhaustion, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. The Women's Aviation Academy was alive, building the sisterhood. It wasn't just a school anymore. It was a family. Amira, our fiery mechanic-turned-student, was the first to roll up her sleeves and get her hands under the cowling whenever one of the planes groaned. She teased the others mercilessly, but she was also the first to cheer when someone nailed a maneuver. Helen, our silver-haired dreamer, carried a quiet resilience. She struggled the most in the beginning, her reflexes slower, her confidence shaky, but she refused to quit. Her determination inspired the younger students, who often stayed late to study with her. Then there was Lila, a college dropout who had been told she was too distracted to ever finish anything. She threw herself into ground school with a kind of hungry energy, scribbling notes until her hands cramped, asking question after question until Rachel had to gently cut her off. Each woman brought something different, but together they created a bond one hadn't expected. They studied together, ate together, and on nights when exhaustion threatened to crush me, they reminded me why we'd built this place. First flights. The first time Amira took the controls on her own, I watched from the tarmac, my stomach tied in knots. The little Cessna roared down the runway, lifted gracefully into the air, and climbed against the blue morning sky. For a moment, my breath caught. She was airborne, alone, trusting herself, trusting the machine. Minutes later, when she touched down smoothly and taxied back, she threw open the cockpit door and whooped loud enough to echo across the hangar walls. "I did it," she shouted, running toward us, her grin so wide it could have powered the landing lights. I hugged her tightly. "Yes, you did. And you'll never forget this day." Watching her, I thought back to my own first solo, the mix of terror and joy, the way the world looked different from that day forward. And now, here I was, watching someone else cross that same invisible threshold. One by one, the others followed. Helen's landing was rough, bouncing once, then twice before the wheels settled. But when she climbed out, her cheeks wet with tears, I knew she had won a battle far greater than the airplane's resistance. "This was supposed to be impossible," she whispered. "But I did it." And I believed her. Rumblings of doubt. But success brought new challenges. Our small grant was nearly drained. Fuel costs were rising. Repairs came faster than we could afford. And though the students' passion was endless, my own energy began to crack under the weight of logistics. One night, long after the others had gone home, I sat in the office with my head in my hands. Bills scattered across the desk glared up at me like accusations. Rachel walked in quietly, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," she said, sliding one toward me. "We're out of money, Rachel. I can't keep the planes flying on hope and duct tape." She sat across from me, her expression calm but firm. "Do you remember what you told me when we started this? If I don't do this, who will?" That hasn't changed. Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they reminded me of the fire I had nearly forgotten. "We'll find a way," she said. "We always do." Unexpected spotlight. A month later, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Feature Story. Women's Aviation Academy. A journalist from a national aviation magazine had heard about us. She wanted to visit, interview the students, and run a feature. When the article came out, everything shifted. The headline read, "Breaking the Glass Ceiling, One Flight at a Time." Suddenly, our little hangar wasn't so little anymore. Calls poured in from women across the country who had always wanted to fly, but never dared. Donations trickled in from strangers who believed in our mission. Local news stations showed up with cameras. The academy was no longer invisible. A test of resolve. Not everyone welcomed the attention. One afternoon, as I walked across the parking lot, a man in a crisp pilot's uniform stopped me. He looked to be in his 50s, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "So you're the one running this circus," he said, his tone sharp. I squared my shoulders. "It's not a circus. It's a school." He smirked. "Teaching women to fly? That's cute. But let's not pretend this is serious. Aviation isn't charity work." I felt the old anger rising, the same burn I'd carried from years of being dismissed. But this time, I didn't let it consume me. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not charity. It's the future." I left him standing there, his smirk fading. The ripple effect. By the end of the year, our student body had doubled. Amira was preparing for her commercial license. Helen was mentoring new recruits, proving that age was no barrier. Lila was logging hours faster than anyone, her distraction transformed into laser focus when she was in the cockpit. And airlines that had once dismissed me, were beginning to take notice. Recruiters called, curious about these women who weren't just learning to fly, but learning to lead. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, I stood outside the hangar watching a group of students push the planes back inside. Their laughter floated on the breeze, their silhouettes outlined by the fading light. Rachel came to stand beside me. "Look at them," she said softly. I nodded. My chest ached with pride. "We're not just teaching them to fly," I said. "We're teaching them to take up space in a sky that never wanted them there." Rachel smiled. "And they're proving it was theirs all along." For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel like a pilot. I felt like a leader. The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying with it the familiar scent of jet fuel and dewy grass. I stood on the edge of the tarmac, coffee in hand, watching as our fleet of Cessnas gleamed in the rising sun. It had been 2 years since the Women's Aviation Academy opened its doors. What began as a dusty hangar and 2 second-hand planes had grown into something I could never have imagined. We now had 5 trainers, a simulator lab, and a roster of 20 students. More importantly, we had stories, real women taking their first steps into the cockpit and rewriting what was possible. But with growth came new storms. It happened on a windy afternoon in March. Lila, once the restless college dropout, was preparing for her check ride, the exam that would determine if she earned her private pilot's license. She was nervous, but I knew she was ready. She'd logged the hours, practiced the maneuvers, studied the weather reports until she could recite them in her sleep. Still, as she taxied out, the wind picked up. I watched from the ground, heart thudding. She lifted off smoothly, but on her downwind leg the gusts hit harder. The little Cessna bounced, dipping and swaying as though it were caught in invisible fists. For a moment, my stomach dropped. I saw her hands tighten on the yoke, her jaw set. The examiner beside her scribbled something on his clipboard, impassive. Then, slowly, carefully, Lila steadied the wings. She adjusted, compensated, breathed through the storm. When she landed 20 minutes later, the examiner climbed out, expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to her and said, "Congratulations. You passed." The look on her face, the mix of shock, pride, and sheer relief, lit something in me. She hadn't just flown through turbulence. She had flown through every voice that had ever told her she wasn't enough. Stories like Lila's began to ripple outward. Our students were passing exams, logging hours, and applying to airlines. Recruiters who once ignored us were now calling. Then one day, I got a letter with a seal I knew too well. The National Aviation Board had nominated me for an award recognizing outstanding contributions to aviation training. When I told Rachel, she whooped so loudly the students came running, thinking something had caught fire. "Maya," she said, hugging me tight, "they finally see you." But the truth was, I didn't need them to. For the first time in my life, recognition wasn't the goal. The sky was no longer about proving myself, it was about opening doors for others. The return of an old shadow. At the award ceremony, I wore my best blazer, my hair pulled back in a sleek bun. As I stepped onto the stage, applause filled the room. I scanned the crowd and froze. Mark Benson sat in the front row, arms crossed, his smirk exactly as I remembered. The man who had once told me passengers didn't want to see a woman in command. After the ceremony, he approached me, his expression unreadable. "Sterling," he said, his voice lower, more careful than before. "I'll admit, I was wrong about you." I studied him for a long moment. The old me would have swallowed those words like a life raft. But now, they were nothing more than a passing cloud. "You weren't wrong about me, Mark," I said evenly. "You were wrong about women." And with that, I walked away. The fly-in. That summer, we hosted our first women's fly-in, a gathering of female pilots, students, and dreamers from across the country. The hangar buzzed with energy, laughter, and stories shared over coffee and charts. Planes lined the runway, flown in by women who had once believed there was no place for them here. Amira, now with her commercial license, gave a talk about her journey from mechanic to pilot. Helen, our late bloomer, led a workshop on resilience and lifelong learning. Lila, fresh off her Czech ride, flew a demo that had the younger girls cheering from the ground. As I watched them, my throat tightened. This community, this movement, was bigger than anything Rachel or I had first imagined. It wasn't just about teaching women to fly. It was about rewriting the story of who belonged in the sky. A letter from a girl. A week after the fly-in, a letter arrived at the hangar. It was written in uneven handwriting, the kind that wobbles with the uncertainty of youth. "Dear Captain Sterling, my name is Sophie. I'm 12 years old. I used to think flying was just for boys, but then I saw the article about your school. Now I know I can be a pilot too. Someday I'll come to your academy. Thank you for showing me girls can fly." I read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. Then I pinned it to the bulletin board in the classroom, where all the students could see. The future was already on its way. Full circle. One evening, long after the hangar had gone quiet, I sat alone in the cockpit of one of our trainers. The controls were familiar under my hands, the seat worn to the shape of countless students. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was 9 years old again, sitting in that first Cessna, while my father asked if I thought I could fly it. "Big dreams, Maya. Don't let anyone tell you they're too big." I smiled through the tears that came unbidden. I had chased those dreams through turbulence and rejection, through storms both in the sky and on the ground. And now, as the academy thrived, as women filled the air with the roar of engines and the freedom of flight, I realized something. The sky had never belonged to the men who tried to guard it. It had always been ours too, and we were here to stay.